Hi everyone, and welcome to Think About It Thursday. Today's a very special video because it's the first of a two-part series titled Advocacy 101, where I'll be joined by special guests to discuss topics such as being your own advocate on university or college campuses, advocacy versus activism, and some pieces of advice for students looking to get involved with the student leadership experience. My guest today is Clancy McDaniel, who's the Executive Director of Students Nova Scotia. Students who've been following SMUSA would know that we work very closely with Students Nova Scotia in order to ensure affordable, accessible, and quality post-secondary education, as well as to make sure that student voices are always present around the table. I'm going to keep the Students Nova Scotia introduction brief, but Clancy's been working as a champion for students for many years now, and I'm so excited to have you here today, Clancy. Thanks for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure, Sam. That's quite the kind intro.
Thanks so much. So I'm going to start right away to keep this brief so students can kind of get the info. But right off the bat, a lot of students probably don't know what we mean when we say advocacy or what their student association or student union is talking about when they say they're advocating on an issue. So could you describe in your own words kind of what is advocacy and why is it so important?
So something we always say, of course, is that advocacy is a lifestyle, which means it's all about how you bring forward and really push for issues that matter to you, that impact you, and particularly from, the standpoint of the student association, impact students generally. If you're a SMUSA student watching this today, it is Sam's job to represent kind of what you're facing in your day-to-day, just specifically when it comes to your university experience. So advocacy is a number of things. When we talk about advocacy as Students Nova Scotia does it or as SMUSA does it, really it's about identifying the issues, coming up with solutions, and then presenting those solutions to decision makers so that they can actually go forward and make a change. You do that typically in two ways. One side would be kind of campaigns, so engaging with media, getting public interest, getting students to sign on to something, doing get out the vote campaigns like we have in the past. And then the other side is more like lobbying. So sitting down with the university administration or sitting down with politicians that represent all of the parties in the Nova Scotia legislature and kind of bringing forward the issues that way so that we can see some more systemic change from the top down. So it's both a bottom up and top down process, but really I think because we all have issues we care about, we certainly can all be advocates in our own way.
Absolutely. I think that's perfect. And it captures exactly what Students Nova Scotia and SMUSA team do on an almost daily basis. I'm wondering if you can maybe briefly touch on how or why you decided to become involved with advocacy work, first at St. FX and now with Students Nova Scotia.
Absolutely. So I kind of came from it I wasn't a big fan of my student union. So I know it's a student association at SMU, but it was a student union there because I felt like they were a little out of touch with what the average student was potentially going through in terms of what issues were actually being talked about. I had worked in residence for a number of years, so I had not only just been exposed to the issues that my friends were facing or that I was facing, but in helping, folks kind of through their first 2 years, which are often the most difficult when you come to university. I saw so many different things going on, from food insecurity to housing, to the cost of tuition, the cost of textbooks, sexualized violence prevention, mental health, the list goes on, as we've said. So rather than kind of sitting on the sidelines, I said, that's something that I want to make a change in. And so I applied to be the Vice President External. I was hired. I also ran to become the chair of Students Nova Scotia, which Sam admitted she is this year and is doing a fabulous job. And then post-graduation, I applied for this position, the full-time position at Students Nova Scotia, and I've been here ever since. So I think a lot of the best advocates, honestly, don't come to this work because they say, oh, I want to be a vice president, or I want this position to show up on my LinkedIn. They come because they have a passion for student issues. And a lot of times folks might come with one issue that they really care about. So for example, more than anything else, I really cared about sexual violence prevention. I went to St. FX, it is a massive issue there, and I wanted to do something about it. By extension, I learned so much about all the different things that were going on and have now had a chance to be a part of that. And hearing from students, when you're in a position like that, a main part of your job should be at least having conversations with students who don't have the exact same background as you so that you can learn what the different issues are. But I think if you're watching this and you have like a burning deep passion for anything related to the student experience, it's something worth exploring.
Absolutely. You touched on something there that's kind of what I want to move to next, is that for most students, it can feel really daunting to do any form of personal advocacy in whatever form that may be. So I'm hoping you can kind of shed some light on how students can be on their university or college campuses their own advocate.
I mean, absolutely. First of all, imposter syndrome is so real. I feel like I look at all of my colleagues and think they're so cool and they're so accomplished and they're so professional and they're so this and so that. And it's easy to get kind of intimidated, even when people are your friends, let alone total strangers. Again, when I was looking up to my student union as a student, I certainly never saw myself in that space. And it does take a lot to kind of think to yourself, okay, I'm just going to go for it. And I kind of came at it from whether I get it or not, it's a good experience to try. And because I care so much about the issues, I'm hoping that's going to be what shines through, really, is the motivation piece. In terms of being your own advocate, whether it's for a cause on campus, or off campus, I think really looking to support systems so that you don't have to be entirely by yourself. You know, SMUSA is always looking for motivated students to raise issues or to become a part of the team, right? Like, you don't have to be in it on your own. Advocacy is a team sport. So whether it's getting together a group of friends that have similar interests or going to pre-established places and kind of saying, how can I have a bit of influence here? How can I work my way up to this space? I hope it helps people who might feel a little intimidated by, okay, I personally care about this issue, but what comes next?
Absolutely. And it's always a learning experience, even when you do get into those specified roles, constantly
Absolutely.
learning and learning from other people.
I am still learning every single day. So yeah.
Yeah, me too. The next piece that I kind of want to touch on is something that I think has become more and more prevalent with social media. And that's kind of the difference between advocacy that we're talking about and activism. And normally when we think about advocacy, we think it looks more formal or it sounds more formal. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the difference between those two, if one is more influential, or just kind of some broad thoughts.
So I think you need both, but I think they need to come from different places, if that makes sense. So activism, great example of activism that has worked, of course, or is continuing to work, is the Black Lives Matter movement. And part of the reason why that it has been so effective is because so many people across the globe have chipped into it. If we're talking about student issues, I don't think we're going to get hundreds of millions of people on the street to talk about the cost of textbooks. So that means that you have to be a bit more strategic in terms of who exactly do we want to target with this message and how do we want to go about that. So activism is great because anyone can participate. Well, I think anybody can participate in both, but it's most effective when you're able to get kind of that grassroots movement. Advocacy, when we're talking about formal advocacy, whether that's, again, having meetings with your administration or having meetings with government, it can be sometimes more effective to go in with a really organized sense of what it is you're looking for and why. Because we can't change the fact that the university administration or the provincial government or whoever it is, they hold the purse strings, they hold the decision-making power, and they can just as easily say no as they can say yes. So you have to build a relationship, a professional rapport, and a relationship goes both ways. It's not a relationship where you're just a yes man and you agree to everything, but it's one where you can have constructive conversations both ways so that both parties respect each other enough to listen to what kind of angle you're coming from so that you're able to further the dialogue. So activism is super important in keeping the pressure on. Because it helps, you know, say, for example, I was so impressed by how many SMU students really were talking about the international quarantine issue. I think that was a great example of activism because it put pressure on the province and the university to re-examine their policies. The advocacy piece of that is SMUSA now goes into the meetings and actually deliberates and actually, you know, negotiates on what that looks like. You need both.
Absolutely. I think that's really well said. And sometimes that activism is really the starting point. It's the building blocks that you go off of. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I know a lot of students, this next piece, I know that you will be a fan of it. A lot of students every year wanting to know, what is Students Nova Scotia? I hear it, I see it. I want to know exactly what it is that Students Nova Scotia does. So I'm hoping you can give us a little bit of the spiel of what is Students Nova Scotia and what they do.
The Students Nova Scotia spiel is my favorite. So thanks for giving me this opportunity on a Thursday when this airs. So yeah, Students Nova Scotia is a provincial advocacy organization. So when you think about it, it's similar to SMUSA, but if SMUSA operated on a provincial level. So we have multiple members that come together and try and have a united voice for students, because we believe the more united we are, the stronger our asks and negotiations come across, and the more likely we are to be listened to. When you think about it, the provincial government, of course, is responsible to the people who live here. And if we can have representation from multiple areas, from a greater percentage of students overall, that's more of their potential voters, that's more of their constituents. And it gives us a stronger voice to bring forward and say, this is genuinely what students want. So the way it works is we have a board of directors. There's two folks who sit on the board from each of our members. And every year they bring forward kind of what are the issues that students are worried about, but specifically to what can the provincial government do about it. So we try to start with issues broadly, and then we do some research and we look into, okay, how can the provincial government do something about this? What type of policies or programs are the provincial government already doing or could implement in order to solve this problem? So we try to use a problem-solving lens, and it's worked in many instances. Some of the big areas where we've been able to push for change over the last number of years: continued investment into student employment and co-op and entrepreneurship, which I know is huge at SMU, including additional incentives for employers who hire international students or people of color or Indigenous students or women into underrepresented fields, for example. Lots of changes to student loans. Now, every Nova Scotian who graduates within 5 years has their Nova Scotia student loan forgiven. That's massive. And we've also had the $750 grant that went out this spring for Nova Scotia student loan borrowers in relation to COVID. Lots of things going on with sexualized violence prevention, $500,000 every year towards looking for solutions. Mental health, very similarly, Healthy Minds Nova Scotia. If you've had a chance to check that out, that was originally a Students Nova Scotia recommendation. So really, we just try and find creative yet doable solutions and bring those forward to government.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned some of the wins, because I think sometimes students hear about these things and they don't necessarily connect it back to Students Nova Scotia or any of the members. So I'm really glad they mentioned that as well. So my last thing that I kind of want to touch on before we wrap up, we're kind of coming in the time that student executive members would call transition, which is when students start to think about applying for executive positions or even running an election race. So if you could give interested students one piece of advice, what would you say?
I would say do it. I would say do it. I would say, you know, it's hard to imagine how much a single experience can change your life. But I think if you were to talk to anybody who has had the privilege, really, the honor to have these positions, it has. It has made me a better person. It has made me a better professional. And it's genuinely once in a lifetime. And it's something that so many people our age don't have the ability to have. So if you're even somewhat thinking about it, do it, because absolutely you're going to put a lot of hard work over the next few weeks in terms of running or getting your application prepared, but it pays off so much to know and get to know students all over the campus and figure out, exactly how you can help, and listening to their solutions and bringing that forward. There's really nothing that's more rewarding on top of being just this incredible experience. So I would say talk to anybody who already has the position you're interested in. I'm sure that they would love to hear from you. Go for a little coffee chat, send some emails, figure more out, be prepared, but absolutely put your best foot forward and just do it. The worst that can happen is that it doesn't happen for you this year. It doesn't stop you from looking at it in years to come. I know people have done 5th and 6th years in order to stay on at their student association or to run for their student association. So absolutely, in the words of Nike, just do it.
Absolutely. I love that. And yeah, reach out to anyone. I think this year in particular, it was really important to be reaching out to previous student executive members or students on campus as part of societies, because there were so many things that happened this year that it was really important to reach out and just kind of ask those questions. So that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Clancy. It's always a pleasure. And I think the advice and insights students are going to find really helpful today, not only moving into the student leadership roles or just about advocating for themselves on campus. So thank you so much. And like I said, this is part 1 of a 2-part Advocacy 101 series, so keep an eye out for that.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Take care.